answer really succinct to the point because we only have about 15 minutes. We are being on schedule. So with that, it looks like I'm going to try and start us off. It looks like we have a bunch of people ready to go. So I guess we're going to get right into it.
Nick, this question's for you. When I talk about the Fair Elections Act, one response of it is, oh, I don't want my money going to some politician. And then it's a real short-sighted view, and I'm wondering, when you hear that, or if you hear that, what do you think is the best way to respond to get people on board?
It's a good question, because you do hear that back sometimes. I think there are a couple of good answers. One is, to take them back to a choice between a small amount of their taxpayer money going to this versus the current system, because the current system is very real and it's terrible. And so if you say, when you look at all the solutions out there, something that might cost $1 or $2 per voter, it's not a lot of tax money, it's a small amount. The other way to do it, though, is to talk about, under this small donor-driven system, it's all based on where a taxpayer sends their own money that triggers taxpayer money. In other words, if I'm paying $1,000 of taxes or even $100 of taxes, what I do when I send a $50 contribution to a candidate under a fair election system is trigger more of my tax money that I've already paid in to go to that candidate. And that's a little abstract, because there actually isn't someone who goes down to my account and takes it specifically out of mine and sends it. But the basic idea holds true. Another way to do that is with some form of tax credit, and Professor Lessig is here also. There's another system where you would just give everybody the first $50 of their taxes would go to publicly financed candidates. So there are other ways to do it, but I think, again, it's taking back your money from the government and sending to the candidates you want is sort of one way you can talk about a small donor system. It's publicly financed.
Hi, this question is for Nick. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about McComish v. Bennett, the 2011 Supreme Court case, because I struck down a provision of the matching funds in Arizona and caused me to question me, and maybe just tell these people a little bit about it, where things go.
So he raises a question, and the Supreme Court is best known for Citizens United. There's actually a string of really lousy decisions they've made. The McComish decision, or the Arizona Fair Elections decision, as it's also called, actually took a key piece of the policy in Arizona and Maine and said you can't do this anymore, and actually in Connecticut also. Under those systems, once you qualify, you get all the money you need. If your opponent spends more money than you automatically get money to keep the playing field level. And if an outside independent expenditure committee attacks you, you also get additional money to respond. And through the years, this has been challenged in court, and the judges have ruled consistently that you have a right to speech, you don't have a right to unanswered speech. But then it hit this Supreme Court, and this Supreme Court said, if I know that my big money coming to this race is going to generate public financing for you, I might decide not to do as many of those attack ads as I was planning to, so it might chill my wealthy person's speech. Right? So it is sort of crazy. We said, no, there's more speech. It just means in addition to that independent expenditure, the other side gets to be heard from. That's more speech. That's good. That's a constitutional value. And this Supreme Court sort of turned that upside down and said, no, more speech is actually less speech and unfair. So the remedy to that decision, fortunately, there is one. The policy remedy is this fair election system under which if you need more money for your race, you keep raising small contributions and get matching funds from the government. So it's not triggered by the action of your opponent or an independent expenditure committee. Instead, it's you saying, I need to go get more supporters. And this idea of dependent upon the people alone, it drives the candidate back into the people they're supposed to serve and forces the candidates to rely on ordinary people for their electoral success. Think of that compared to the system now, where if your opponent dumps huge money on you, you got to go find someone who can write you a massive check. So it digs you deeper into being dependent on the very few who can write those checks. So that's the difference. But there is a policy answer.
Hi, my name is Matthew Edge. I'm from the Occupy Democracy Project, and we're involved in building a voting block, money out of politics voting block, to help elect candidates who support things like clean elections. And we've had some success in seating some legislators and replacing them. And I guess, with all eyes on New York right now, I'm a little bit disappointed in what's been put forward. And specifically, it seems that a lot of the government groups have come on board with a compromise legislation that doesn't really go as far as something like Clean Elections does, that bases the amount of money you get based on how much money you can raise, not based necessarily on how much support you have. And I guess coming from a perspective of Occupy, this is an Occupy conference, and the role that Occupy has had in creating that sort of Overton window and really pushing the envelope, whether it's really the position of Occupy to be compromising and whether Occupy should actually be demanding something more. Oh, do you guys think that Occupy should be demanding more?
Wait a second. Everybody should be demanding more, okay? All right, so the question is, in New York, should we be settling for what the legislature is likely to pass? I think a lot of that depends on what they pass. I think what is being pushed by the organizations I mentioned would be much, much better than what we have now. It would not be as good as what we could possibly get in an ideal world, but I think it's worth getting now. I think in the New York system, they actually have improved it since it's been in place. They've made it less reliant on larger money, more reliant on smaller money, and magnified the voice of ordinary people. There are some studies that show where money comes from in New York is much more diverse since they accentuated the small donations than before when they did, because they still create an incentive for candidates. It allows a candidate to be dependent upon the people alone, and the current system doesn't. It doesn't say you have to be dependent on the people alone, which I think would be an ideal. So everybody has to judge that for themselves, and we should always be fighting for something better than what they're about to give us. So I hope that's some kind of answer.
Hi, this question is for Marilyn and Mark, because you were talking a little bit more about the type of movement that would be needed, or like specific actions. One of the things that I've found, it's very easy in this culture for the truth about situations to be manipulated. And these are obviously complex problems we're dealing with. Running politics is no simple solution. They're very complex, systematic things that need to change. So I'm curious to hear you talk about how we can both simplify the issues so that it's something that everyone, like your neighbor, everyone can kind of talk about and meaningfully sort of demand from the system, but how to make sure that through that demand that the government or the politicians don't do what they do so well, which is just water it down, fill it full of loopholes, and sort of give us something lukewarm. Yeah, I'm just curious to hear how you balance that with a challenge that, with this, a problem that's so much more complicated than some things that other movements in the past, I would say, have dealt with.
So what you're really saying is that public financing isn't that sexy, right? So the way to build support and to talk to voters about is to talk about it in the context of the values of interest and connect the dots there. Start with, depending on your audience, what is it that they care about? And see if you can connect the dots back to why, say, education, maybe there's something going on in their education system that they're having problems with. Why isn't that getting addressed? Well, think about, okay, why are electeds not addressing this issue? Who is funding them? And bring the circle back around. I always come from the issue of looking at why can't we have, fair wages? Because businesses don't want to pay more money, right? They want to keep more of their profits. So you look at, connect the dots. The businesses are maybe funding specific candidates, and therefore, people actually, it clicks for them. They're able to connect to it that way. I think starting with, we need fair elections, or we need money out of politics, it may be too broad, but if you talk about something that's near and dear to their heart, people will listen. I also think that sometimes you also want to make sure that you have the right messenger, right? I don't have any children, so maybe I'm not the best person to talk at a PTA meeting. Maybe you have to build your coalition in a way that represents so many different views and ideas and types of constituents that they're the ones who are more appropriate to talk to those people and that person at times. So think outside the box for who you build your coalition. I mean, the New York coalition's like 75 groups strong, and from Faith the Franciscans to Common Cause to labor advocates to immigrant workers. because they're the right ones to talk to those constituents. And they're the best ones to go door to door on too, so.
I think Marilyn said it great. The only thing I'd add is I think it's not an either-or proposition. We need to be educating ourselves and others about the details and being conversant in them so that we feel like we're all comfortable to be a part of a citizen dialogue or the citizens debate about important policies. But I think, one, sometimes because all of us are here because we're super passionate about it, we're going to start with that first and sometimes forget that some people aren't moved with that first, or you need to start someplace else and then get to there. And I'll give you a story that gives you an example. So in my mind, stories are just a huge part of it. I used to work on a campaign challenging water privatization. In my first year, I was mostly a researcher for doing campaign work, and I was asked to do some fundraising. And I went to the house of a woman who'd supported the organization's work for 20 years, sat down with her for about an hour. She was great, and I thought I was a nice guy. I had a good conversation, and I rolled out, all the stuff I just learned about, the increasing rate of water privatization, how it, cuts people off from the resources they need to live, which is really compelling to me. And she was like, that's nice. And, she said, I really like you guys, so I'll give you a little bit of something this time, but, I can't quite connect the dots. I know it's important, but I just don't know. Following spring, I went to the World Water Forum in Mexico, where there were massive protests outside this corporate-driven dialogue on global water policy, and saw women who'd traveled on a bus for 4 hours from the fields where they were working in, who were 4'0" that marched for the next 5 days, 20,000 strong, challenging the corporate sponsors of this thing. That was compelling to me. It told the story way better than my facts and figures could. I went back to that one the next year and got a $5,000 check because I told her that story. So we need to think about the facts, but we also need to think about the stories that are going to move us and realize that people are moved in lots of different ways.
Hi, my name is Gigi, and my question is actually towards Marilyn. You said that you were going to corporations and asking them to refrain from giving money to politicians or people in politics. But the thing that I've recently been learning about is a lot of these corporations' bottom line, and actually in the law, is to make money. So if they're giving politicians money so they can kind of persuade them to, I guess, benefit their company, wouldn't they be, in essence, breaking the law? So, you know what I mean? Because they have to make more money, which is why, there are lower wage cuts for women because they want to keep more money. So how would you, I think that maybe changing the laws or how corporations go about business would be better than telling them to take money in politics.
Yeah, corporations aren't necessarily making money for the corporation, they're making money for their shareholders. Those are the ones, those are the people that are actually benefiting from whatever it is that business is doing. I think, the role of a corporation has changed. Mark touched on this earlier. It was, corporations were created to provide some level of service there and to produce things that benefit the public. They are now focused on just really the bottom line. And but corporations, specifically consumer-driven type corporations, what they also don't like is bad publicity. So because they don't want to have that negative image. They don't want to be perceived as someone of a corporation that's doing bad for the public because they need consumer support. So there is that fine line, but if you can harness and educate the shareholders to understand the impact that they're having on the communities that they are trying to build their stores in or get people to buy things on, their bottom lines will start to dry out. Look what happened to Target in 2010 when they were giving money to it was Minnesota Forward that was funding, that was anti-marriage organization, and and Target is a corporation that's friendly of all. It's in their policy, but then all of a sudden they're starting to give money to the candidates that oppose marriage. And they got a huge consumer backlash. And now, Target is actually one of the corporations that now has a resolution before their shareholders saying that they will not engage in political spending because they've seen directly the impact you know, on their bottom line, that given and engaging the political system has had to their corporate to their corporate dollar and to the perception of their corporation. So.
Sorry, we have to do a stage change between this panel and the next. We only have time for one more question. But if you could save your questions until after, I'm sure the panelists would be happy to
To be the last person speaking all of a sudden. I find myself, my name is Patrick, I'm from Occupy Wall Street. I find myself in a weird place in my life and in this conference, that I'm the most radical voice in the room. It's weird to be that. And this is a question for the panel, but it's also a question for you out there. I think a constitutional amendment ultimately is necessary. We're going to work on the campaign finance, and we're going to work on the resolution. We're going to do all those things. I'm going to help. When it comes time for the constitutional amendment fight, which I cannot see as anything other than absolutely necessary, what are we going to ask for? Are we going to ask for a campaign finance board where the rules will be set by Congress and they might be changed, or maybe they will be fair, maybe they won't be fair? Or are we going to ask for something super simple, like let's stop allowing private money into the public electoral system? Good, I'm glad, thank you. Thanks. I don't want to feel alone here. I would like to see from this audience and also from the folks on the stage, anybody who can answer the following question. What is the inherent and essential value of private funds in a public electoral system? Considering that we own everything that's necessary already. We the people. We own transportation, we own communication resources, we own town halls, we own all kinds of things collectively together. Why do we have to allow private money to come in and purchase anything in the public electoral system? I'd love to see a show of hands. Anybody who can answer that question. I definitely want to hear it.
Capitalism is the crisis.
We got to put him in jail.
Well, there's a lot there, and I can't claim to address it. I think it's a great point. I guess where to start is that we get asked this question a lot about the constitutional amendment language that we're supporting. Where our vision is something that encompasses the idea that corporations shouldn't have the same constitutional rights as people and that money should not be equated to speech. But the reason that those questions are difficult is because there are a lot of people who work on a range of different issues who have their own radical vision of democracy that is I think, in keeping with the values here, that have raised legitimate concerns about elements of any particular language that's put forth. I can't tell you with authority, but I can tell you of the 13 different amendment proposals that have been introduced in Congress, of the dozen different amendment proposals that are put up by different groups, if there's a person who thinks it's the right solution, I can find you 2 other people who think it's the wrong one. And those people might have very good reasons for feeling that way. I don't want to discourage people from being involved in amendment work, because I think we can work it out and figure it out, but if it were easy to find the language, we would have found it by now. And it's not easy. We have to work through it. We have to have spirited debates to figure out, will the proposal that you put forth, for example, work? Frankly, I don't know about campaign finance yet to know. I've heard some people say that private financing could be something that we could deal with, but I've also heard people say that if we eliminate private financing, that actually quells your free speech rights, your individuals, because while money is not speech, money can be used to amplify your speech. So I'm going to sidestep the question because I don't know how to answer that particular thing, but I'm going to use it to open the broader issues. How do we walk that line between finding this compelling vision, what is the mechanism, while also realizing that we need time to figure out this stuff, because there are a lot of smart people thinking about it, and we haven't figured out the thing yet. You guys want to say more? You're just going to let me hang?
And now I guess we're going to have a stage change before we bring on Lawrence Lessig. So let's thank these guys for coming.